A ruthless manager fires a low-level employee, unaware he just humiliated the CEO in disguise. But what happens next stuns everyone. The morning rush filled the corporate office as employees hurried to their desks, sipping coffee and preparing for another long workday. Among them was Daniel, a quiet, middle-aged man dressed in an ill-fitted suit, his ID badge marking him as a new temp in the customer service department. No one paid him much attention. To them, he was just another replaceable worker. But what they didn't know was that Daniel wasn't a temp at all. He was Daniel Carter, the CEO of the company, working undercover to see how his employees were truly treated when management wasn't watching. And what he had already witnessed in just a few days? It was worse than he expected. His department was ruled by a manager named Rick, a man who thrived on authority, barking orders at employees, taking credit for their work, and treating anyone beneath him like garbage. Daniel had seen it all firsthand. The way Rick dismissed complaints, how he cut corners to boost numbers, and worst of all, how he belittled employees who dared to question him. Daniel had planned to observe longer, but fate had other plans. "Hey, you, new guy!" Rick's sharp voice cut through the office. Heads turned as he stormed toward Daniel, face twisted in irritation. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Daniel blinked. "Excuse me?" Rick shoved a report onto his desk. This is all wrong. You've been here a week and you're already screwing things up?" Daniel glanced at the file. It wasn't his mistake. Someone else had filled out the report incorrectly before it even reached him. He opened his mouth to explain, but Rick didn't let him. "I don't have time for excuses. We don't need dead weight here." Rick leaned in, smirking. "You're fired." Silence fell over the office. A few employees exchanged nervous glances but said nothing. They had seen this happen before. Daniel exhaled slowly. Then, much to everyone's shock, he smiled. A calm, almost amused smile. Rick frowned. "Did you hear me? Get your things and get out." Daniel nodded. "Oh, I heard you." He stood up, adjusting his tie. Then, in a voice that sent a chill down Rick's spine, he added, "Now, why don't you say that again? But this time, in front of the entire executive board?" Rick's smirk vanished. "What?" Daniel reached into his pocket, pulled out his real ID badge, and placed it on the desk. The color drained from Rick's face as he read the name. Daniel Carter, CEO. The office was deathly silent. Rick swallowed hard, his voice barely above a whisper. "Sir?" Daniel crossed his arms, tilting his head slightly. "You just fired me, the owner of this company." He let the words hang in the air before adding, "Now let's see what happens when I decide to fire you." Rick's face turned ghostly pale. His mouth opened, but no words came out. Around the office, employees sat frozen, watching the scene unfold with wide eyes. No one had ever spoken back to Rick before, let alone fired him. Daniel leaned back against the desk, arms crossed. His voice remained eerily calm. "What's wrong, Rick? You were pretty confident a second ago." I didn't know," Rick stammered, his usual arrogance completely gone. "Sir, if I had realized—" Daniel raised a hand, cutting him off. "That's the problem. You didn't realize. You never even looked at me. Because to you, I was just another disposable worker, wasn't I?" He gestured toward the stunned employees. "And I'm guessing I'm not the only one you've treated like this." Murmurs rippled through the office. Some employees exchanged knowing glances. Others nodded subtly, as if silently confirming everything Daniel had suspected. Rick's desperation kicked in. "Sir, please, I've been with this company for years. I was just trying to enforce discipline." Daniel let out a dry chuckle. "Discipline? Is that what you call it?" He picked up the incorrect report, the very reason Rick had fired him, and held it up. "This wasn't even my mistake, but you didn't care. You just wanted to show your power." Rick swallowed hard. I can fix this." Daniel's eyes locked onto his. "Oh, you will. But not in the way you think." Rick straightened slightly, hopeful. "So I'm not fired?" Daniel smirked. No, not yet. But let's make this interesting. He turned to the employees. How many of you have been mistreated, belittled, or had credit stolen by Rick? For a moment, silence. Then slowly, hands started going up. 1, 2, 5, 10. More than half the office. Rick's breathing became shallow. Sir, please, I can change. Daniel turned back to him. You will, because starting today, you're the temp. Rick's face twisted in confusion. What? Daniel stepped closer, lowering his voice just enough that only Rick could hear. You want to stay? Fine. You'll work from the bottom up. No title, no authority, no special treatment. You'll report to the very people you abused. You'll take their criticism, their feedback, and if, even once, you act like the man you were today, you'll be out that door before you can beg for mercy. Rick's jaw clenched, but he nodded stiffly, knowing he had no other choice. Daniel turned to the rest of the office. As for the rest of you, things are about to change around here. And with that, he walked away, leaving behind an office buzzing with whispers, stunned faces, and one humiliated man who had just learned the hard way. Power isn't about the title you hold. It's about the respect you earn. Rick stood there, frozen, as the weight of his new reality sank in. He had gone from barking orders to being just another employee, one who now had to answer to the very people he had tormented for years. The office, once filled with silent resentment, now hummed with barely contained satisfaction. Daniel, now back in his rightful place, wasted no time in setting things straight. He turned to the team, his voice firm but composed. From this moment forward, this company will be run with respect. No more intimidation, no more credit theft, and no more managers who treat their employees like they're disposable. The employees exchanged glances, their disbelief shifting into something else, hope. Daniel looked directly at Rick. Starting now, you'll report to the same people you disrespected. You'll take on the work they did while you sat back and took the credit. He let that sink in before adding, and at the end of your probationary period, they will decide if you deserve to stay. Rick's face burned with humiliation, but he forced a nod. He had no other choice. Then, from the back of the office, a slow clap started. At first, just one person, then another, and another. Within seconds, the entire floor erupted into applause. It wasn't just for Daniel. It was for the justice they had all been waiting for. Rick swallowed hard as he glanced around. For the first time, he wasn't feared. He was powerless. Daniel smirked. Welcome to the real world, Rick. With that, he turned and walked toward his office, knowing he had just set in motion a change that would be felt long after he was gone. Rick, on the other hand, sat down at a desk that wasn't his, one without a nameplate, without a title, and without an ounce of power. For the first time in his life, he was the one at the bottom. The next few weeks were a living nightmare for Rick. Gone were the days of barking orders and throwing his weight around. Now, he was at the mercy of the same employees he had once humiliated, forced to do the tedious, demanding work he had always considered beneath him. No special privileges, no corner office, just a cramped desk in the middle of the bullpen, where every mistake was met with the same cold indifference he had once shown to others. Rick, one of the senior employees, Karen, called from across the room, barely looking up from her computer. I need the client reports by noon. Rick gritted his teeth. I don't have access to those files. Karen shrugged. Then figure it out. Or should I tell the CEO you're struggling with basic tasks? Snickers echoed around the office. Rick's face burned, but he said nothing. He had no power here, no allies, no escape. And Daniel? He watched everything unfold from his office, a knowing smirk on his face. He had given Rick a choice, redeem himself or walk away. And while Rick had stayed, it was clear he was drowning in the same toxic environment he had once created. One afternoon, Daniel found him in the break room, staring blankly at a cup of coffee, his usual arrogance long gone. Rough day? Daniel asked casually. Rick flinched, then straightened. I'm managing. Daniel leaned against the counter, arms crossed. You still think leadership is about control? Rick hesitated, then sighed. I get it now, he muttered. It's about respect. Daniel studied him for a moment. He had expected resistance, excuses, but instead, he saw something else. A man who had finally learned. Good, Daniel said, pushing off the counter. Then maybe there's hope for you yet. Rick looked up, confused. What does that mean? Daniel turned back with a smirk. That's up to you. And with that, he walked away, leaving Rick to sit with the realization that this was his one and only chance to change. Because in Daniel Carter's company, there were only two types of leaders, the ones who earned their place and the ones who never got it back.